It is Friday, October 21st. Let's talk PlayStation. Hello everyone, welcome back. It's been another very eventful week in the world of PlayStation. A lot going on, including today where God of War Ragnarök previews should be going out, which I can't acknowledge on the show since we filmed it a bit earlier, but that is a big story coming out today, is previews for God of War Ragnarök, so be on the lookout for that. It should be available right as this show goes live. But first up, as always, our PS Plus reminder. So the October PS Plus Essential Games are still live. Make sure you claim those before they go away. Also, PlayStation Plus Extra and Premium, those games are live as well on PSN. For our first story, though, let's talk about the DualSense Edge because Sony finally revealed the price tag, the pre-order information, the release date, all that stuff. And starting off, pre-orders will begin next week, October 25th, and it will launch first on PlayStation Direct January 26th. Other retailers will get it in stock February 23rd, and as for the price, it'll cost $199 USD, €239, or £209 sterling. The replaceable stick modules will be available separately for $19.99 USD, €24.99, and £19.99. As a reminder, the entire package includes the controller, a USB-C braided cable, 2 standard caps, 2 high dome caps, 2 low dome caps, 2 half dome back buttons, 2 lever back buttons, connector housing, and a carrying case. That's the full package for what is, of course, a very high asking price, and that was the initial gut reaction, was the sticker shock of this thing. But, if we do kind of dial back to the initial reveal of this controller, I had mentioned on the show, it's like, well, this thing is certainly going to be in a price range of anywhere from $150 to, let's say, $200 something, and knowing Sony, it's likely going to be on the higher end. And so it's very much, as shocking as it sounds, in that comparable market value for what these things usually go for, which is a very premium, high-grade controller meant for competitive play, and also something where this thing appeals to a very small audience for those that are really interested in these kinds of controllers. If we do try to compare it to other things in the market, obviously the Elite Series 2, you can get that full package with the separate accessories and the carrying case. I think that's around $150, which is certainly much more affordable, obviously. But they did just launch that controller on the Design Lab, so if you want it customized, it goes up to $210. But of course, it's customized at that point, which some might deem, worth it. But if you look at PS5 controllers, your only other option really is Scuff, where they have the reflex and the FPS. I think those controllers start at like $200 and they go up to $250, $300, just a crazy amount of money. But the real problem with the DualSense Edge is really the back button situation, because while the price, again, as crazy as it sounds, is kind of in that range of where it should be, you're only getting 2 back buttons. And that's like the real issue with this thing, is that if you are in the market for that kind of controller, you really want at least 4 back buttons. So unless you really value being able to swap out the entire stick assembly, which that is obviously a cool thing, right? If you're that worried about stick drifting, you can buy an extra set for $20 and the whole thing swaps out. You don't have to ditch the whole expensive controller. That's cool, but unless you really value that and the build quality and all the other features, then I think this is just a really tough sell, even for those that are looking forward to this kind of thing. But, bear in mind, this thing is really not for most people. It really appeals to a smaller audience, which I think even then, this is kind of a tough sell for what it is. Moving on to our next story, if you remember about 2 weeks ago, we talked about how PS5 was finally hacked, and it was something where in terms of overall privileges, you couldn't really do too much, so you couldn't run unsigned code, but what you could do was get access to the debug menu. You could edit the whitelist on PS5 to play things that you're not supposed to, and that's what we initially saw somebody do alongside Lance McDonald, where he installed PT on his PS5, but recently what he was able to pull off was running PT on a normal stock PS5 with a very recent firmware, which was insanely cool. So he showcased this and talked about it on his Twitch, where essentially he had to use the jailbroken PS5 to edit the whitelist and add PT back on there, but he then basically made a guess that if he backed up the jailbroken PS5 to an external drive, that restoring it to a different console would possibly allow the game to run again. And yeah, that's more or less it. meaning that the list of games that are blocked isn't directly tied to the firmware, but instead something your console downloads the second it's connected online. And he did confirm this by saying once he connected the console via Ethernet, the game was blocked almost immediately. So it's one of the first things your PS5 does when it connects online is check and download the blacklist, which I thought it was more tied directly to the firmware. So every time you update your console, it on board has the new list of games that are not able to be played or run, which nowadays it's entirely PS4 demos and trials. It's not like we've had new backwards compatibility games that don't work. It's been 6 games for over a year now, so that's largely unchanged. But when it comes to the blacklist, I thought it was more of an onboard in the firmware kind of thing. So actually pretty cool to know that it is something where it's directly tied to the console being connected online, and it downloads it and stores it in some sort of random directory in the other category of your system storage, right? But it's really cool to see this happen, especially because it's a very specific set of parameters to make this happen, so most people cannot do this. You still need a jailbroken PS5 on a year-old firmware. You need a normal PS5. You need a PSN ID that is genuine and has the PT license on your account, right? So if you've never had PT downloaded back in 2014, then this is already not going to work. A very specific set of parameters, but still something where it was really cool to see actually play out. Now, speaking of PT, good segue to our next story, which is Silent Hill. We finally have most of what's going on with this franchise. The rumors we've been following for a long time, and I'm sure most of you saw it, but on Sunday, Konami announced a new live stream for updates in the Silent Hill franchise that would air on Wednesday, and that live stream came and went, and so we finally know what's going on with this franchise and Sony's involvement, and it is confirmed a Silent Hill 2 remake is on the way from Bloober Team. It's a PS5 and PC timed exclusive for 12 months. Both Masahiro Ito and Akira Yamaoka are involved in working on this project, and no release window is given. Silent Hill Downfall was also announced. This is the smaller project from Annapurna Interactive. The developer is No Code Studios. Then there's Silent Hill Ascension, which is going to be this real-time live experience where people can tune in on multiple platforms and vote on decisions in the story that plays out, which will then determine a canon plot line, all in real time, no going back. So that sounds pretty interesting. And then finally, we have Silent Hill F, lowercase f, perhaps the most mysterious title here. It's considered, I don't know, is it considered a spinoff? We're not entirely sure. It is written by Ryokishio7, creature designs by Kara, and no platforms or release dates were given, but this is from the Taiwan-based developer Neobards Entertainment. So for right now, at least, it appears this is not the rumored Sakura project from a prominent Japanese developer that was supposed to also have a short teaser called Silent Hill: A Short Message, which we know was rated. It's a real, product of some kind that should be shown off fairly soon, but it was not here. So based on what we know, this and Silent Hill F are 2 different games, but also something where they might be related in some way, because there's very obvious themes going on here with the flowers and cherry blossoms and things blooming off of bodies. So there's very much some kind of relation going on here, but we don't necessarily know. Either way, it's nice to finally have all this out there, and the reason why we were always following these rumors is that despite it being a third-party franchise, it's always something where we can tell that Sony might have some interest. The rumors certainly always implied that, and we also saw the whole debacle with PT, where Sony announced that during their Gamescom press conference. It was a big deal. It was going to be a multi-platform release, but Sony certainly got very close to the franchise, and it seems like the interest was always there, and now they're here again with a Silent Hill 2 remake from Bloober Team. Good to hear that Akira Yamaoka and Masahiro Ito are involved, and they're, in some way watching and working on this project. They hear the concerns. So we'll see how that plays out. I'll stay optimistic. I'm not really going to speak too much on it. I'm not a massive Silent Hill fan. In fact, having watched the entire live stream, it just makes me want to go back and replay Silent Hill 2 because it's been so long since I actually played the original game. But either way, we have that. And that's why I said this is mostly everything, because we don't have the Sakura short message project revealed just yet, and that was the one where, in theory, we were hearing that Sony was also going to be involved with that in some way, and I suspect it will be very similar to how PT played out, where Sony will have the rights to either announce it or have a short message show up on PSN exclusively, so we might still have that show up in the short term. Not sure if it's going to be by the end of this year, but it could be something where maybe it shows up at the Game Awards. Sony likes to show up at Jeff Keighley events with at least one thing, right? So I think at this point we might see something like that play out, maybe a different announcement. We'll talk more about that later, but at least for right now, it's good to finally have the Silent Hill stuff out there. It's been a long running series of rumors, and now it just seems so weird that, Konami just went haywire with all these Silent Hill announcements in quick succession after what was the last full release on PlayStation Vita of all things. Let's move on to some PlayStation Studio game updates. First up, like I mentioned at the top of the show, God of War Ragnarök preview should be going out today, so again, I can't really speak directly on them, but if you are interested, then by all means, go check them out. Otherwise, I would say if you want to be on a media blackout, then avoid them, but just to clarify, because previews are going out, that also means reviewers do have the game, so we do know the review embargo will lift November 3rd, so that is when God of War Ragnarök reviews will go live, November 3rd. Be on the lookout for that. Also, on the PlayStation Game Sizes Twitter account, we do have an updated file size for this game, and it's looking very big so far, at least. It's always subject to change based on day one patches. But so far, PS4 is over 100 gigabytes, and PlayStation 5 is nearly at a little bit under 100 as well. So PS5 will be a bit smaller, but this is most definitely going to be what it looks like, a 2-disc PS4 game. And at this point, based on previews being available, it seems like Sony might not do the sort of standard affair, in-depth state of play that we normally expect with higher profile PS5 games. Yet again, outlining that when it comes to Sony, we just can't necessarily predict based on history or certain patterns. Even within the past 2 years, they're always doing something just a little bit different. Next up, we have a very small, but I guess somewhat noteworthy update for Spider-Man 2 and Insomniac Games, where over on Twitter, somebody had reached out and they sent a tweet saying that they were concerned that the game was going to get delayed or something, or that they're not showing enough or whatever. They didn't make a new trailer or something like that, right? And Insomniac replied, and I quote here, don't, implying that don't be concerned. We're making good progress and it's still slated for 2023. Showing games takes time, effort, resources, and coordination. So nothing untoward going on here, and I'm sure most probably knew that already. It's just that the running theme lately has been the conversation surrounding a PlayStation showcase or some kind of state of play, live stream, anything before the year closes out. Even if it's not this year, let's say it's early next year or whatever, it's always been kind of a reasonable expectation that whenever we get another live stream of some kind, that Insomniac will be ready to show off a new trailer for, at a minimum, Spider-Man 2. It's still fairly well known that, with Wolverine, that is likely further out, sometime, kind of like a 2024 game, right? It would be surprising otherwise if it was anytime sooner. There was actually a story that came out with Microsoft's response to the CMA that they had put in there. Wolverine was a 2023 game. I don't think they have any sort of inside knowledge on that. I mean, sure, there's kind of, social circles crossing over. Maybe some Microsoft folks know what Sony's up to, but for the most part, I would say that's a fairly optimistic timeline. So Wolverine is further out, and Spider-Man being slated for next year. There's just a lot of, I don't know if concern's really the right word here. Insomniac's been just killing it lately on this during this console generation, but for this game in particular, and really PS Studios at large, it's really been something where we just have to be patient. They're not ready, and let's be honest, putting any kind of trailer together in time for some sort of arbitrary date that Sony sets for a live stream, it's always a huge pain, and just really it gets in the way of the process. So as trivial as it might sound, and as important as it might sound for fans to see the game, it really is, it kind of gets in the way when they're just busy actually working on the game and making sure that it releases on time. Moving on to Naughty Dog, where recently the Uncharted Legacy Thieves Collection finally came out on PC, and so far it's reviewed very well, where across 43 different reviews, it averaged out to an 88 on Metacritic, which is very good. In fact, it bodes well for what Sony's been doing lately, which is high-quality day one PC ports. And I think that's what they've really tried to be diligent on, is making sure they don't kind of fall into that expected reputation of other third-party publishers that often ship very shoddy PC ports on day one, and sometimes they just never even fix them, or they kind of just let them die in the state that they're launched in. And Sony kind of had that issue initially with God of War. God of War did have some patches, but Horizon and Days Gone initially were kind of in that realm, but they did see additional updates, and now they're in a much better state. But I think Sony wants to really make sure they build a great reputation of having high-quality day one AAA PC ports with a vast array of options, and so far they've largely done that. And over on the PlayStation blog, Naughty Dog also talks about what it was like adapting PC development into their historically console-only workflow, also working with Iron Galaxy on this PC port, and how that's going to shift and evolve in the future. So we've got a quote here from Naughty Dog's Vice President, Christian Gerling, where he says, and I quote here, "We're excited to be offering The Last of Us Part 1 on PC in the future, and know that, moving forward, adding PC development to the way we develop games, which in no way undermines the importance of PlayStation 5 as our primary platform, will continue to benefit our team in the long run. As Naughty Dog has come to better understand hybrid and work-from-home development over the last few years, PC development offers our team flexibility in how, when, and where our games are created. Much like players can enjoy Uncharted Legacy of Thieves Collection on PC from a variety of PC builds, our developers can work on PC iterations on various pieces of hardware from home or in the office." Now, if you remember, Herman Hulst recently just did an interview where he outlined this very directly when it comes to PC releases, and how, unless it's a live service-based title, it's not going to be day and date, but more so we can expect a around 1 year timeline on high-profile PS5 games coming out, and then a PC version again around 1 year after. So you have to imagine that at this point there was a dialogue from PlayStation corporate and Sony's historically console-based developers, their entire first-party roster, and also any sort of external partners that they're working with, that, hey, you should expect a PC version to be in the pipeline, so you have to start incorporating this in some way, or, reaching out to Nixxes Software, or, contracting out a studio, or just figuring out a new pipeline that really works for that particular studio, and it doesn't necessarily hamper their ongoing work on what is, at least right now, where you would assume, a PlayStation 5 project. Because if they are going to do a around 1 year timeline, there certainly is adjustments that have to be made for all these teams, which again have historically only shipped on PlayStation hardware, assuming they've been under the PS Studios umbrella for a very long time. But I would say Sony is definitely being very serious about the PC releases and making sure they are high quality when they come out, and thus far they've really been delivering, and that's a good thing. Now, yesterday was kind of a big deal because we finally got that new promised October trailer for Final Fantasy XVI. Sure enough, just a random PlayStation blog post, and the trailer is out there. It's a 4-minute long trailer. This one focuses more on new characters, and also it's kind of more focused on the story, right? It's not too gameplay heavy, but, seeing more of the characters and the icons, and just explaining the lore, and it looks good. It looks really good, really fascinating. And over on the PlayStation blog, the producer, Naoki Yoshida, says, and I quote here, "With regards to development, the team has turned the corner and entered the home stretch, and is currently concentrating its efforts on debugging, tweaking, polishing, and optimization. We'll be back soon with more information about the world of Final Fantasy XVI." So that sounds great. I mean, by and large, this game is having a much better, at least on the surface, a much better cycle than what we saw with Final Fantasy XV. I still think it's surprising everybody that we're getting this game seemingly so soon, right? Not, I say soon loosely, but just such a straightforward development process of announcement. Here's a dev update, we're doing good, this is done. There's been a very healthy dialogue between Square and the fans about how this game has been progressing smoothly, and so they seem to be on track for summer 2023, and that's good news. The crux of the issue with what is good news here and an awesome trailer is that this took a lot of wind out of a possible PlayStation showcase for this year, or even a state of play. Again, it's been the running theme for a while, is that September's gone, now we're in October, and so despite there being a handful of things that we could see, like Helldivers 2 being revealed, the DualSense Edge, PSVR 2 details, of course, the Silent Hill stuff, and now this trailer, which for Final Fantasy, that was the one thing where, based on what we saw prior, it was at a PS showcase, and also the second trailer was during a state of play. So there's plenty of things that Sony has had. They could have, wrapped it all up into one live stream and called it a showcase, which that's always a bit gray on what constitutes being called a PlayStation showcase, which generally it's a 45-minute live stream with a lot of trailers from both first and third-party developers, and that's why lately we could have seen, Silent Hill stuff there, we could have seen the RE showcase stuff there, but we have to also remember that third-party publishers want to do their own things too, and it's not like Sony can't offer their announcements for those live streams, and that's what we're seeing. It goes back to that video we did a few months ago where the problem with a PlayStation showcase this year is that many of Sony's first-party developers simply are not ready to talk about whatever it is that they're doing, and we also mentioned in that video, we simply cannot look at what Sony's done the last 2 years and say, that's how they're doing it now, this is the new Sony. Even that, there's no predicted timeline here. They like to drip feed announcements too. They like to do state of plays that are either minuscule or sometimes, they kind of catch you off guard and there's a lot of really cool things in there. They're just kind of going at their own pace. When things are ready, they're ready. I think Q1 2023 at this point, we're looking like that's where we'll see some more meaningful things that they're ready to talk about, which we know, like PlayStation VR 2 finally launching, or at least within that first period of 2023, and then also details on The Last of Us Factions. We know these things are coming, but seems like this year we are not going to get them. Perhaps that'll still change. You never know what's going to come in November or December, but I think we are probably looking at something at the Game Awards, and that might be it. Now, file this one under a leak that is definitely a leak, but it's boring, uninteresting, and we're really kind of grasping at straws, but hey, it's still an actual leak, which is the PSVR 2 manuals have popped up online. Pictures, at least, where they're being printed right now. So if it wasn't obvious, Sony's preparing manufacturing for this thing, and the manual is part of that package. And so we saw pictures of the manual pop up. Nothing exactly shocking or revealing in there, but we can see that we can see its weight, we can see its dimensions, we can see some specs, we can see the setup process, which is plugging it in. In all honesty, though, it is humorous to see that because it's a far cry from the setup process of the first PSVR, where again, it's just a mess of cables. It's like a 5 or 6 step process, which actually looks kind of ridiculous when you actually do reference that manual. But hey, it's a leak. PSVR 2 coming next year. Moving on to what was probably one of the larger talking points from this past week, which was actually a series of events that played out in relation to 30 FPS games on current gen consoles, that being Xbox Series S, X, and PlayStation 5. So we'll run through everything that went down, but basically this started off with, it was revealed during the build-up to Gotham Knights release that game would run at 30 FPS with no performance mode settings, despite dropping previous generation versions. Naturally, this led to some criticisms, and so the executive producer explained on Discord that due to certain features like the fully untethered co-op, this is why the game is only 30 FPS on consoles, with no option to adjust it. After this came out, a Rocksteady developer chimed in with a few tweets saying that they wished gamers understood what it takes for a game to reach 60 FPS, especially considering we have a current-gen console that isn't much better than the last, referring to the Xbox Series S. They explained the bottleneck is the GPU mostly, and how multi-platform games are always optimized for the lowest performer. Going on further to say, the Series S is a potato that has hamstrung an entire generation of games. In the same week, it was also confirmed that A Plague Tale Requiem is 30 FPS on consoles, with the only other option being 40 FPS on a 120Hz display, which so far the performance hasn't been all that great, with the game now being available. We even saw the Callisto Protocol Twitter account use this as an opportunity not only to address the delay rumors, but confirm they'll offer a 60 FPS mode, and this tweet then got a staggering 38,000 something likes. Then Jeff Gerstmann had sent out a tweet saying the Series S holding back next-gen argument seems to be broken to him, relating it to the PC environment and the variety of systems there. Then a VFX artist at Developer Bossa, whom worked on I Am Fish, responded saying the reason why this discussion keeps coming up is because many developers have been sitting in meetings for the past year trying to get the Series S launch requirements dropped, because if you're trying to ship a game on Xbox platforms, it is a requirement to ship on Series S and X simultaneously. They've since privated their Twitter account, but they did say, and I quote here, "Studios have been through one development cycle where Series S turned out to be a albatross around the neck of production, and now that games are firmly being developed with new consoles in mind, teams do not want to repeat the process." So that, for the most part, is what went down, and it certainly ignited a conversation surrounding 30 FPS on consoles, and there's been a lot of pushback on these two games in particular, which they are very much outliers. Thus far, with PS5 and Series X, major AAA games that would say need a performance toggle have had them, and so you've seen a lot of folks now grown accustomed to 60 FPS on consoles, which that alone has been so trippy and kind of weird but awesome to see, right? Because historically, console developers will almost always sacrifice frame rate first for increasing visual fidelity. And the reason why is because, well, not only were those times where visuals meant a lot more, but also it's never been proven that a high frame rate has led to more sales. There's just been plenty of studies. A lot of developers and publishers have always looked into it. There's just never been any kind of correlation of a high frame rate meaning higher consumer engagement. It's always how pretty you can make the game look, going all the way back to PlayStation 1 when 3D graphics really flourished, right? The PS1, the N64, and that's always been where the misconception comes in of these consoles can't handle 60 FPS, but it's always something where they could. Developers often choose not to because there are a lot of concessions that have to be made to make the game run at 60 frames per second. But this generation has been different, where it's a cross-generational period where the outgoing machines are very similar. We're in a world of diminishing returns in terms of visuals, and so you can offer 60 FPS without necessarily sacrificing too much, but now we are finally getting to that point where 2 years in, we've got two games that are not offering it. And the reasons given, A Plague Tale, there has been no major explanation. In fact, like I said, the performance on that game has actually been not that great across all systems, so something where that might just be, a patch might have to come in for some optimizations there. We don't know what's going on with the underlying code and, how the game was made, obviously, but, there's that. And for the Gotham Knights explanation, where it's the untethered co-op and more features, some would, of course, make the case, and some are, where it's like, okay, for Series S that might be fine, but for PS5 and Series X, there should be plenty of headroom. I don't care what it takes. Drop the resolution, drop the visual fidelity. I just want a 60 FPS mode. It should be commonplace. And the problem there is that while that does sound totally reasonable on the surface, we simply don't know what's going on with that particular game behind the scenes. Even if it doesn't look visually outstanding, we don't know what's going on with their world streaming or what's waiting in memory. I mean, just every game is made different. So oftentimes it is hard to make generalizations, but it is fair to say that you can drop certain things to get a higher frame rate, but the problem is frame rate is extremely demanding. So to the point where oftentimes, depending on what that game is, you would have to make so many concessions to where the expectation of what that game should look like is severely sacrificed to simply get the game running at a higher frame rate. And that's why I think we're going to see kind of a diverging path here of, once it's all full-scale Series S, PS5, Series X, we may very well see some projects push that hardware to the point where when you're trying to do so much, it isn't necessarily feasible to offer 60 FPS. That may sound strange, but it really is something where when you have a minimum set goal on what the game is going to look like and the scope that you're trying to achieve, then 60 FPS doesn't necessarily work for that particular kind of game, which are going to be, that might be very far and few between in terms of releases, because nowadays the thing that's hampering, beautiful, graphically appealing games is not the hardware, it's just pure budget. Nowadays, more modest visually appealing games with a cute art style or something, that usually can do just as good, if not better, than the big budget stuff. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And for Series S, this is going to be an interesting thing with that machine, because it certainly is a much lower spec box compared to PS5 and Series X. But that one dev mentioned GPU, but I remember quite well, it was two id Software engineers back in 2020, I think before the consoles actually came out, where they had mentioned the big problem with Series S is the memory. It's a lower amount of memory versus Series X, and so much happens in memory to where that could be a serious bottleneck down the road. So while the GPU performance isn't really all that there, and it always depends on what you're trying to accomplish, but memory could be an issue. And that's, you have to keep in mind, developers aren't necessarily going to always shout from the rooftops of how bad it is to work on one platform, or, air out their criticisms. They're not really supposed to be doing that, so that's why we don't hear this too often. But that was two id Software engineers 2 years ago. And there's been a handful of accounts that have popped up here and there expressing concern over Series S, and Microsoft is not going to drop that machine, especially when the ratio for that machine is like nearly half, which I'm shocked by. I thought a while ago it was like kind of a PS5 digital situation where it's an 80-20 split, but I believe Microsoft sells a majority or near majority of Series S machines compared to Series X. So I can't see them dropping the requirement to make a Series S version anytime soon, which may or may not be a bad thing long term, because there's simply no getting around it. You do have to worry about that minimum spec box. The good news was always Series S has an incredibly fast SSD as a minimum, but memory could pose an issue. It really depends on the game. And again, nowadays, the real constraint is simply budget and not necessarily hardware, but we'll see how this plays out over time. But I do think with as the years go by, the really high-end stuff may get pushed to a point where 60 FPS is simply not going to be offered, and that'll be interesting to see play out, especially when, nowadays consumers are more mindful of frame rate. The vast majority likely still aren't too aware of it or care all that much. We do live in a different time where trailers are coming out now, and you see 60 FPS blurbs come up as like a huge selling point, and that is really interesting, right? That was never a thing only a few years ago. So times have changed, but again, I think it's going to be a lot different moving forward, and if the public outcry is enough, maybe things really will change and 60 FPS will always be a standard, but I suspect it will not. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. You can follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories that I wanted to talk about you all from this past week, and our Tuesday video was a new game collection update. Episode 9 picked up some very interesting, cool, and quirky PlayStation controllers, and some more video games as always, and coming up, another upload on Tuesday as usual. But until then, that is it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.